I still remember the sound of my home when my children were little. Laughter echoing down the hallway, footsteps racing toward the kitchen, the clatter of plates during breakfast. It was noisy, messy, alive. And I loved every bit of it. Now the only sound that fills these walls is the ticking of the old clock above the fireplace. Sometimes I let it tick louder than it should, just to remind myself that time is still moving, even when life feels like it has stopped. My name is Margaret, but my children used to call me Mama, sometimes Ma when they were older and trying to sound grown. I raised 3 children in this small house, Ellen, Michael, and Sophie. Each of them so different, yet all mine. Their father, James, passed away when Sophie was still in high school. He was the steady one, the calm voice in our home. When he died, I promised myself that I would hold the family together no matter what. And for a while I did. We had Sunday dinners. Oh, those were my favorite. Ellen would bring her little boy, Michael would tell stories from his job in the city, and Sophie would sit close to me, asking about recipes she pretended to want to learn. The house smelled of baked chicken and rosemary. The kind of smell that told you, you're home, but life changes quietly, almost politely. You don't hear the door closing. You just notice one day that the laughter doesn't come from this house anymore. It started small. A text left unanswered. A phone call that slipped their mind. I told myself it was nothing. They had their own lives, jobs, children, worries. I didn't want to be a burden. Ellen was always the organized one, the caretaker type. When James died, she took it upon herself to make sure I stayed busy. She'd call every few days at first, checking in, reminding me to take my pills or eat properly. But as time went on, those calls grew shorter. I'll call you tomorrow, Mom. Sometimes, tomorrow never came. Michael, my middle child, had always been the dreamer. He moved to Chicago for work. Big job, big city, small time for family. He'd send birthday cards with printed signatures. Once, he sent me a photo of his new office view, all glass and sky. I was proud, but something inside me ached. I wanted to ask if he still kept that small wooden car he made with his father, the one that used to sit on his nightstand. But I didn't ask. Maybe I didn't want to sound lonely, and Sophie, my youngest, my heart. She used to call me just to talk about nothing. Mom, guess what I saw today? She'd start, and we'd talk for hours about her life, her work, her friends. Then one day she got engaged. And after that, everything began to change. At first, I was overjoyed. I helped her plan the wedding, folded napkins, even sewed tiny pearl beads onto her dress hem. But once she got married, the calls slowed down. We've been busy, Mom. You know how it is. Yes, I knew. Or at least I thought I did. I started keeping my phone close, even when I slept. Sometimes I'd wake up at night thinking I heard it ring. But it was only the wind brushing against the curtains. People don't tell you that loneliness doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in gently, between the spaces of silence. One afternoon, I baked a pie, the kind James used to love. Apple cinnamon. I made too much, of course. I thought, I'll call Ellen. She can bring the kids. But then I thought of how busy she must be, and I didn't call. I just sat at the table and watched the pie cool down. The next morning, I wrapped it up and gave it to my neighbor, Mrs. Collins. She smiled and said, "You always bake too much, Margaret." I smiled back, but she didn't see the tears in my eyes when I walked home. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. My phone sat quiet, like an old friend who didn't know what to say anymore. Then, one day, I found myself scrolling through old messages. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Love you. Can't wait to visit soon. Promise I'll call this week." Promises. So many of them, I tried to keep myself busy. I joined a knitting circle at the church, started gardening again. The tulips bloomed that spring, bright and cheerful. I even took a photo to send to Ellen. But the message stayed unsent. I began to wonder if this was what aging really meant. Learning to be invisible. One evening, while making tea, I stared at the family photo on the fridge. It was from Ellen's wedding, all of us smiling, arms around each other. I looked at my face in that photo and thought, she didn't know yet. She still believed they'd always come home. I don't remember when I stopped expecting the phone to ring. It just happened. Like turning off a light you didn't realize was still on. But then something changed. Not outside, but inside me. I started talking to James again. Not in a strange way, just in the quiet moments. You'd laugh if you saw how quiet it's gotten, I'd say while washing the dishes. I imagined him smiling back, that same gentle patience he always had. Somehow, that made the silence easier to bear. I thought maybe this was what peace looked like. Not joy, not sadness, just acceptance. But deep down, a part of me still waited. Not for a phone call, but for a sign that love doesn't just fade with distance. And as it turns out, life has a way of answering, sometimes when you least expect it. It was late autumn when I first realized something had changed for good. The air had that crisp, tired feeling it gets right before winter. The trees outside my kitchen window were almost bare, and the afternoons seemed shorter somehow. Quieter, too. That morning, I made a pot of chicken soup, the same recipe Ellen used to love when she was little. She'd come home from school, cheeks red from the cold, and say, "Mom, you make the best soup in the world." I smiled remembering that. And I thought maybe I'd call her, just to check in, see how she was doing. I dialed her number, waited, and listened to the rings. 1, 2, 3, 4, then voicemail. Her voice came through cheerful but rushed. "Hi, you've reached Ellen. Sorry I missed you. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." I didn't leave a message. I just sat there, holding the phone to my ear until the line went silent. That became a pattern. I'd think of something small, a recipe, a TV show we both used to watch, and I'd pick up the phone. But then I'd stop. I told myself I didn't want to bother her. Maybe she'd call when she had time. Michael called once in early November. He sounded tired, distracted. I asked if he was eating well. He laughed, said, "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine." I asked about his job, and he said it was good, busy. Then there was silence. Not the comfortable kind, the heavy kind. "Michael?" I said, trying to sound light. "You haven't visited in a while." "I know," he said quickly. "I've been meaning to. Work's just been crazy lately." "You know how it is," I said I understood. Because that's what mothers say. But after we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from me. I whispered softly, "I don't really know how it is anymore." Thanksgiving came around. I used to host every year. Roast turkey, mashed potatoes, the works. I'd spend 2 full days preparing, even though I knew I'd be exhausted by the time we all sat down. It wasn't about the food. It was about having everyone under one roof again. This year, no one mentioned it. Ellen said they were going to her husband's parents' house. "Just for this year, Mom, you understand." Michael had a work event. Sophie said she and her husband were traveling for the weekend, so I made myself a small turkey breast, mashed some potatoes, and sat at the dining table alone. I tried to be grateful. I had food, a roof, and memories. But it's hard to be thankful when your heart feels empty. Halfway through dinner, I found myself setting 3 extra plates on the table, just like old times. I poured water into glasses out of habit. Then I looked at the empty chairs and whispered, "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone." The silence that followed felt louder than any noise I'd ever heard. A few weeks later, the first snow fell. I woke up early, excited like a child. I thought, maybe Sophie will call. She always loved the first snow. She used to run outside, arms wide open, shouting, "It's snowing, Mom!" I waited all morning. The phone didn't ring. That afternoon, I decided to call her. She answered after a few rings, her voice warm but distracted. "Hey, Mom, I was just about to call you." I smiled even though I didn't believe her. "It's snowing here," I said softly. "Do you remember when you used to make snow angels in the yard?" She laughed. "Oh yeah, those were fun." "How are you, Mom?" "I'm good, sweetheart. Just a little quiet here." "Yeah," she said. "It's been crazy busy for us. Mark's working late, and I've been helping with some stuff at the community center." I wanted to tell her that I missed her, that the days felt longer without her voice. But instead I said, "That's nice, honey. I'm proud of you." We talked for a few minutes, light, surface-level things, and then she said she had to go. "I'll call you soon, okay?" I said, "Okay," but she didn't. By Christmas, I had stopped expecting anything. I still put up the tree, the same old one James bought our first year in this house. The ornaments were faded now, some cracked, but each held a memory. I hung them carefully, one by one, talking to them as if they were the children themselves. "This one's yours, Ellen," I said, holding up a little wooden heart. "You made it in 2nd grade. This one's Michael's, the airplane he glued together. And this one," I smiled softly, "Sophie's angel. You broke the wing, remember?" I placed the angel near the top, right where she used to insist it should go. That night, I sat by the tree with a cup of cocoa and turned on the old record player. Bing Crosby's voice filled the room. "I'll be home for Christmas, if only in my dreams." I laughed through my tears. "Seems like dreams are all I have left," I whispered. I woke up Christmas morning to the quiet hum of the heater. The snow outside was untouched. My phone sat on the table, screen dark. At noon, a text arrived from Ellen. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Hope you're having a nice day. We'll visit soon. Love you." Soon. That word again. Michael sent a photo later, him at a restaurant with friends. No caption, just smiles. Sophie called in the evening. I picked up so fast my heart skipped. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Merry Christmas, Mom. Sorry I couldn't call earlier. It's been a crazy day. We're with Mark's parents. I wish you were here." I smiled even though I wanted to cry. "Me too, honey. Me too." After we hung up, I sat in the living room for a long time. The lights on the tree blinked softly, reflecting in the window like stars that had lost their shine. That night, I dreamed of James. He was standing in the kitchen, his hands in his pockets, smiling at me. "You did your best, Maggie," he said. "You always did." When I woke up, my pillow was damp. The days that followed felt slower. The mailman was the only person who knocked on my door. Mrs. Collins would wave from her porch sometimes, and I'd wave back. We both knew that wave meant more than it looked. I tried to reach out again. I wrote little letters, not long ones, just small notes. "Thinking of you. Made your favorite cookies today." I mailed them to Ellen and Sophie. Weeks passed. No reply. Then one afternoon, Ellen called. "Mom, you don't have to send letters," she said gently. "We get your texts. It's just hard to keep up sometimes, that's all." I felt my throat tighten. "Oh, I thought it'd be nice, that's all." "I know, Mom. I just don't want you to worry, okay? We're all fine. Promise." After we hung up, I went into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I stared at the phone, thinking about how love changes when people grow up. It doesn't disappear, it just gets quieter. Sometimes so quiet you start to wonder if it's still there. Spring came again. The tulips bloomed early this year. I took pictures of them, bright yellow and red, proud against the green. I thought of Michael. Tulips were his favorite flower as a boy. He used to pick them and put them in a jar on the kitchen table, grinning proudly. "Look, Mom, for you!" I sent him one of the pictures with a short message. "Your favorite flowers are back." He didn't reply. A few weeks later, I found out from Ellen, in passing, that Michael had been in town for a business conference. He hadn't mentioned it. My heart sank, but I didn't say anything. I just nodded and said, "Oh, that's nice." That night, I stood by the window, looking out at the empty street. The sky was pale blue, fading into evening. I thought about all the things I'd done wrong, all the times I might have said too much or not enough. I wondered if I'd somehow become someone they didn't need anymore. That thought hurt more than I could ever say. So I stopped calling altogether. If they wanted to reach me, they would. And if they didn't, well, I'd learn to live with that. Days passed quietly. I kept my routines. Coffee in the morning, a walk around the block, a book before bed. Sometimes I'd talk to James again. "They're grown now," I'd say softly. "I guess this is how it's supposed to be." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. because deep inside, I still hoped that one day, one of them would remember. That they'd hear a song or smell something I used to cook and think, Mom would love this. I didn't know it then. But that hope was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. And sometimes the only way to find your family again is to let them lose you first. It was a cold evening in late October when I first felt the ache in my chest. At first, I thought it was just from working in the garden too long. The weather had turned chilly, and I'd been out there trimming the rose bushes, trying to keep them alive before winter came. But by nightfall, the pain had grown sharper. It wasn't unbearable, but enough to make me stop what I was doing. I sat on the couch, my hand pressed against my chest, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. I didn't want to make a fuss. I'd been alone long enough to learn that fusses don't get you very far. So I made myself some tea and waited for it to pass. It didn't. By midnight, the pain had turned into a deep, heavy pressure, like someone sitting on my chest. My breathing felt short. For a moment, I thought about calling 911, but then I thought, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's just gas. I laughed at myself for thinking that. Then I felt dizzy. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The room was quiet except for the soft beeping of a monitor. My arm ached where the IV was inserted and my mouth was dry. I blinked slowly, trying to remember how I got there. A nurse walked in, smiling kindly. "Good morning, Mrs. Collins," she said. "Collins?" I asked, confused. "Oh, sorry, Mrs. Parker," she corrected herself, checking the chart. "You gave us quite a scare." "You were found on your kitchen floor last night." I stared at her, trying to piece it together. "Who found me?" "Your neighbor, Mrs. Collins. She noticed your lights were still on late and came over to check. It's a good thing she did." I felt a wave of embarrassment mixed with gratitude. "She always worries too much," I murmured, my voice barely audible. The nurse smiled again. "You're very lucky. You had a mild heart attack, but you're stable now. We'll keep you here for a few days for observation." I nodded slowly. "Did anyone call my children?" She looked at me kindly. "Yes, we contacted them this morning." I felt my chest tighten again, not from pain but from something deeper. I imagined their phones lighting up with the hospital's number, the pause before answering, the way their voices might change when they heard the words "your mother" and "hospital" in the same sentence. Ellen arrived first. When she walked into the room, her eyes were already red. She rushed to my bedside, grabbing my hand. "Mom, why didn't you call someone? Why didn't you tell us you were feeling sick?" I smiled faintly. "Didn't want to bother anyone? Bother anyone?" She repeated, her voice trembling. "Mom, you scared me half to death." I looked at her face. Older now, tired, but still my little girl. I wanted to tell her that just seeing her there made it all better, but my throat felt tight. A few hours later, Michael came. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who wasn't sure what to say. "Hey, Mom," he said softly, pulling a chair closer. "Hey, honey." He looked around the room. "You look good. Considering you know," I smiled. "You always were bad at hospital talk." He laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, guess I was." Then he looked at his hands. "I should have called more." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Sophie came later that evening, her hair still damp from the rain. She walked in quietly, set her purse down, and took my other hand. "Mom," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." I stroked her hand gently. "You're here now, sweetheart. That's what matters." For the first time in years, all three of them were in the same room again. The way they stood, awkward but close, reminded me of when they were kids, standing in line for school photos. The nurse peeked in and smiled. "Looks like you've got quite the family reunion." I smiled weakly. "Something like that." That night, after they all left, I lay awake in the dark. The machines beeped softly beside me, keeping rhythm with my heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. The next morning, Ellen came early, carrying coffee. "You always said hospital coffee was terrible," she said, placing a cup on the tray. I chuckled. "Still is, I bet." She smiled, but her eyes looked tired. "Mom, I've been thinking, We should find you a place closer to us. Maybe an apartment in the city or— No, I said gently. This is my home. That little house, that's where your father and I built our life. I can't leave it, she sighed, nodding slowly. I just worry about you being alone. I reached out and touched her hand. I've been alone for a while now, honey. But it's not the same as being lonely. She didn't answer. Just squeezed my hand and smiled weakly. When I was finally discharged, all three of them came to pick me up. Michael insisted on driving. Sophie carried my bag. Ellen fussed over every paper the nurse handed her. For a brief moment, walking out of that hospital, I felt like a mother again. Like the world hadn't completely forgotten me. At home, they helped me settle in. Ellen filled my fridge with groceries. Michael fixed a leaky faucet I'd been ignoring for months. Sophie brought flowers and placed them on the kitchen table. When they finally left that night, the house felt warm again, not because of the heater, but because for the first time in years, love had walked through my door. But life, as it always does, kept moving. A week later, the calls started again, at first every day. Then every few days. Then, slowly, they started to fade. I could feel it happening, like the tide pulling back after a storm. One evening, Ellen called while I was watching TV. She sounded distracted. Hey, Mom, just checking in. How are you feeling? I'm fine, sweetheart. You don't have to worry. I always worry, she said quickly. Anyway, gotta run and we're heading to dinner. Love you. Before I could say it back, the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time. Then I smiled sadly and whispered, Love you too. A few days later, I got a card in the mail from Sophie. It had a picture of a beach and the words, Thinking of you. Inside, she'd written, We're so glad you're okay. Mom, promise we'll visit soon. That word again, soon. Michael sent a message that week too. Got a promotion. We'll call you later to tell you all about it. He never did. I told myself not to be upset. They had their own lives, their own worries. But deep down, a quiet truth began to settle. The hospital had been a wake-up call for them. Yes, but only for a moment. One evening, while I was folding laundry, I found myself whispering aloud, What would it take for them to stay? The room didn't answer. Then, a few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Collins knocked on my door one morning holding a letter. This came for you, Margaret. Wrongly delivered to my house. I thanked her, took the letter, and looked at the handwriting. My heart skipped. It was from Michael. I sat down, my hands trembling as I opened it. Inside was a short note. Mom, I've been thinking a lot since the hospital. About you, about Dad, about all the things I never said. I don't know how to fix everything, but I want to try. There's a conference next month near your town. I'd love to visit, maybe stay a few days if that's okay. Love. Michael, I pressed the letter to my chest. My eyes filled with tears. Maybe, just maybe, love hadn't disappeared after all. It had only been sleeping. I wrote back the same day. Just a few words. Of course, sweetheart. The guest room's ready? It always is. When I placed the letter in the mailbox, the air felt different. Lighter. Hopeful. I stood there for a long time, watching the wind move through the trees, and for the first time in years, I whispered to the sky, Thank you. The week before Michael's visit felt longer than any week I could remember. I cleaned the house twice, even though it didn't need it. Washed the curtains, polished the old photo frames, and made sure the guest room smelled like lavender. I baked his favorite oatmeal cookies, just like I used to when he was little. Every evening, I'd glance at the calendar hanging by the fridge, crossing off the days one by one. Not because I was counting time, but because for the first time in a long while, I had something to look forward to. When Saturday finally came, I woke up early. I made pancakes, brewed coffee, and set out 2 plates on the kitchen table. One for him, one for me. Around 9 a.m., I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart raced. I wiped my hands on my apron and hurried to the window. There he was, my son. Taller than I remembered, maybe a little grayer at the temples, but still my boy. When he stepped inside, he smiled awkwardly. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, sweetheart," I said softly, and before I could stop myself, I wrapped my arms around him. It had been years since we hugged like that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He smelled faintly of cologne and city air. I felt his heartbeat against my shoulder, steady and real. When we finally pulled away, he looked around the house. "Nothing's changed," he said. "Some things aren't meant to," I replied. We sat down for breakfast. I watched him eat, just like I used to when he was a boy. One big bite, then a sip of coffee, then another bite. He caught me looking and laughed. "Still watching me eat, huh?" "Old habits," I said, smiling. The conversation started light. Work, weather, his apartment, the endless city traffic. Then slowly, it deepened. He looked down at his plate and said quietly, "I didn't realize how long it's been since I was here." "About 4 years," I said gently. "But who's counting?" he sighed. "I'm sorry, Mom, I really am. Life just got away from me." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Life does that, sweetheart. It runs faster than we can chase it. But I'm glad you're here now." He nodded, his eyes shining. "I missed this house." "I missed you." We spent the afternoon walking through the garden. I showed him the rose bush that James planted the year Michael was born. "It still blooms," I said softly. "Your father had good hands." Michael crouched down, touching one of the petals. "I barely remember him," he whispered. "But I remember how he used to lift me on his shoulders." I smiled. "He was proud of you, you know. He always said you'd build something beautiful one day." Michael looked up at me. "I don't think I've built much of anything that lasts." I wanted to tell him that love lasts, that this moment, right here, meant more than anything he could ever build. But instead, I just said, "You're here, aren't you?" That's enough. That night, we sat on the porch watching the sunset. The sky turned orange and pink, the kind of colors you only get in small towns. Michael leaned back in the chair and sighed. "I forgot how quiet it is here." "Quiet can be nice," I said. "Gives you space to think." He nodded. "Yeah, maybe I needed that." We talked for hours, about Dad, about childhood, about how fast life moves when you're not looking. It felt like the years had folded into each other, like time had taken a deep breath and slowed down. Before heading to bed, Michael said softly, "Mom." "I'm going to try to do better," I smiled. "You already are." He stayed for 3 days. Every morning I cooked breakfast, and every night we sat on that porch until the stars came out. When he finally left, he hugged me tight and said, "I'll call you soon." I laughed lightly. "You better." That week Ellen called, twice. Maybe Michael had talked to her. Maybe my hospital stay had shaken something deeper in them both. She said, "Mom, I've been thinking, I want to bring the kids down next weekend. They've been asking about you." My heart almost burst. "I'd love that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That weekend, Ellen's minivan pulled into the driveway, and the sound of little feet filled my porch. Her 2 children, Emma and Ben, ran toward me shouting, "Grandma!" I knelt down and hugged them both tightly, tears filling my eyes. "You've both grown so much." Ellen smiled as she walked up behind them. "I told you she'd be excited." The house came alive again. Laughter echoed down the hallway. I cooked too much, of course. Baked chicken, mashed potatoes, apple pie. The smells that used to fill this home came back like they'd never left. That evening, Ellen and I sat at the kitchen table while the kids watched TV in the living room. She looked at me, her eyes soft. "I've been meaning to say this, Mom. I'm sorry we've been distant." I didn't realize how much time had passed. I reached across and squeezed her hand. "Time slips away from all of us, honey." "I understand." She nodded. I want the kids to know you. I want them to remember this house, these stories. You're the root, Mom. I don't want them to lose that." My eyes welled with tears. "Thank you for saying that. Ellen, it means more than you know." That night after they left, I sat in the living room surrounded by the scent of dinner and the faint sound of children's laughter still lingering in the air. I felt full, not from the food, but from something deeper. Love had found its way home again. A few days later, Sophie called. "Mom, I heard Michael came by," she said. "Yes, he did," I replied. "It was wonderful." There was a pause. Then Sophie said softly, "I think I'd like to come visit too. Just me this time. I need to talk." When she arrived that weekend, I noticed the tired look in her eyes. She smiled, but it didn't reach her face. Over tea, she finally spoke. "Mom, I've been struggling. My marriage isn't what I thought it would be." I listened quietly, letting her words spill out. The long silences, the arguments, the loneliness she felt even when someone else was in the room. When she finished, she wiped her eyes and whispered, "I didn't know who else to talk to." I reached over and took her hands. "Sweetheart, you'll always have me. You don't ever need a reason to come home." She started crying, and I pulled her into my arms, rocking her gently like I did when she was a little girl. "It's okay," I whispered. "You're not alone." We spent that evening talking, really talking, for the first time in years. She stayed the night, and when I woke up the next morning, she was already in the kitchen making coffee. "I thought I'd surprise you," she said with a smile. "You already did," I replied. When she left later that day, she hugged me tight and said, "I love you, Mom." I felt something inside me finally settle. The house felt different after that, lighter somehow. The air carried warmth again. The phone rang more often. Sometimes it was Ellen, sometimes Michael, sometimes Sophie. Not every day, but enough. One evening, as the sun was setting, I sat on the porch with my cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened. The hospital, the silence, the visits, the laughter that had returned. Maybe love isn't about constant presence. Maybe it's about knowing that even after years of distance, the heart still remembers the way home. I smiled softly and whispered, "We're getting there, James. Slowly, but we're getting there." The wind rustled the trees, almost like an answer. Spring came early that year. The air was warmer than usual, and the lilac bush by the front gate had already started to bloom. I remember sitting on the porch, breathing in that sweet scent, and feeling a quiet sort of gratitude. The house, once filled with silence, now carried small reminders of life again. Ellen's laughter still echoed faintly from her last visit. Michael's coffee mug sat in the cabinet, and Sophie's sweater was draped over the arm of the couch. It felt like traces of them had stayed behind, soft footprints of love that hadn't completely faded. One Thursday morning, the phone rang. It was Ellen. "Mom," she said, her voice cheerful. "We've been talking. All of us. We want to come down this weekend, together." I paused, unsure if I heard her right. "All of you?" "Yes," she said, smiling through the phone. "Me, Michael, Sophie, and the kids, too. We thought maybe we could spend a few days with you." My throat tightened. "That would be wonderful, sweetheart." The moment I hung up, I sat there for a while, letting the words sink in. It had been years since all three of my children were under the same roof. That Saturday morning, the sound of 2 cars pulling into the driveway woke me before sunrise. I peeked through the window and saw them. Ellen stepping out first, followed by her kids, then Michael's tall frame, and Sophie walking beside him. For a second, I just stood there at the door, hand over my heart. It felt like a dream I'd been quietly wishing for had finally come true. When I opened the door, they were all smiling. "Hey, Mom," Michael said, holding a bunch of tulips. I laughed, tears already welling in my eyes. "You remembered I love tulips." "Of course I did," he said softly. Ellen came forward and hugged me tight. Sophie followed, wrapping her arms around both of us. For a moment, it didn't matter how many years had passed or how many calls were missed. It was just family, stitched together again by something deeper than time. Inside, the house felt alive in a way it hadn't in so long. Laughter filled the kitchen as Ellen chopped vegetables. Sophie stirred the pot, and Michael kept sneaking bites of pie when he thought I wasn't looking. "Mom, you still make the best crust," he said, grinning. "You say that every time," I teased. "Because it's true," he said. Handing me a plate, we sat around the table, all of us, like we used to. The kids chattered about school and friends, and I found myself smiling at how easily joy found its way back into these walls. At one point, Ellen looked up and said, "You know, Mom, we talked about you a lot, about how we let things drift. We want to do better." I put my fork down and met their eyes. "I don't want you to carry guilt," I said softly. "What matters is you're here now. Life's too short for regret. All we can do is love better from today forward." They nodded quietly. Sophie wiped a tear from her cheek. "I didn't realize how much I missed this," she said. Michael added, "Neither did I. I guess sometimes we think our parents will always be there, and we forget they need us too." The words hung in the air for a moment, gentle and true. That evening, after dinner, we all sat on the porch as the sun dipped low behind the trees. The sky turned golden, then lavender, then blue. The children played in the yard, their laughter floating through the air. I looked at my 3 grown children, talking softly, smiling, sharing stories, and I felt something deep inside me finally heal. Michael leaned back in his chair and said, "Remember when Dad used to tell us ghost stories out here?" Ellen laughed. "And you'd pretend you weren't scared, but you'd sleep with the light on for a week." Sophie giggled. He'd make the scariest faces. We all laughed then. Really laughed, the kind that warms you from the inside. For a while, it felt like time had turned back, like James was still with us, like the kids were small again, and the world hadn't yet pulled us apart. When the stars began to appear, Michael looked over at me and said quietly, "Thanks for waiting for us, Mom," I smiled. A mother always waits. He reached over and took my hand. Ellen and Sophie did the same. For a moment, none of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence was full of understanding, full of love, rediscovered. The next morning, I woke up early and found Sophie sitting by the window sipping coffee. She smiled when she saw me. "I didn't want to miss the sunrise," she said. "Beautiful, isn't it?" I asked. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think I forgot how peaceful it is here." Ellen came in next, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "We were talking last night," she said. "We want to make this a tradition, coming down every few months. Maybe even for holidays." I blinked back tears. "You don't have to promise anything," I said softly. "It's not a promise," Michael said from behind me. "It's something we want to do. We need it." My heart felt full in a way I hadn't felt in years. Later that day, before they left, the kids ran to me with little notes they'd written. Emma handed me a piece of paper covered in crayon drawings. It said, "I love you, Grandma." Ben's note said, "I'll call you every week, pinky promise." I hugged them both so tight they squealed. "I'll be waiting," I said, kissing their foreheads. When the cars finally pulled out of the driveway, I waved until they were out of sight. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This silence carried warmth. It carried promise. I walked back inside, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat by the window. Outside, the lilac bush swayed gently in the breeze. I thought about everything. The loneliness, the tears, the waiting, and now, this soft return. It hadn't been easy, but maybe love never is. Love bends, stretches, sometimes breaks, but if it's real, it finds its way home again. As I sat there, I whispered almost to myself, "Thank you, James, for giving me the kind of love that still grows, even when you're gone." The sun streamed through the window, lighting up the picture of our family on the mantel. I reached out and straightened the frame. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace, because now I knew the day my children stopped calling me wasn't the end of our story. It was just a long pause before we found our way back to each other, and when they did, the silence turned into laughter again. The distance turned into understanding, and my heart, once empty, was full once more. I took a deep breath, smiled softly, and said to myself, "Some bonds never fade. They just wait for love to remember its way home." If this story touched your heart, Take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing from you. Every word means more than you know. And if you'd like to support the channel and help me bring you more stories like this one, you can send a super thanks right there in the comments. Your kindness keeps these stories alive, and your love helps me share even more voices that deserve to be heard.